We appreciate everyone spending their morning with us, and we will wrap up with questions that anyone has on any of our topics. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Tammy Brasted, Director of IBM Solutions for eCapital Advisors, to highlight leveraging mobile reporting.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. You can go to the next slide. So, from an eCapital perspective, we haven't seen anything take off like we've seen happen with mobile reporting. Mobile reporting has kind of taken business intelligence sort of to a new level, and actually it's a level that I think everybody's actually looked for mobile reporting to be. We can go into industries that were typically slow adopters of technology, and we'll find all of their executives in a meeting with iPads. In the higher education area, we see that a lot too. Higher education was very enamored with a lot of the Apple devices very early on. So we've seen higher education be an early adopter as well. One of the neat things about our mobile reporting is that basically what it's meant to do is it's meant to take your business intelligence and that kind of information wherever you go. So it's a couple of different things, right? It's being able to look backwards and look into history and look at your reports just as you would see them in Cognos Connection. So you can actually, from the application that you download through iTunes, and if you have the app, you can certainly go out and do that. And it'll allow you to just simply go in and access these reports. So just as you see them, just as you see public folders and my folders, right, you can access that. But the new piece that belongs to that is actually the active report piece. And active reports are a technology, it's a type of report that you create with Report Studio. And what it actually allows you to do is actually run in an offline mode, right? So I can actually go in, log in, interact with this data. But this active report is really like a PDF on steroids, right? So I'll go through and demo it in just a minute. But as you go through it, right, I've got the feeling that I'm drilling up and down. I've got the feeling that I'm putting filters on it. And it really gives you the ability to interact with this data, typically at an aggregated level, to get the information that I'm looking for. Go on to the next one. One of the kind of really cool things about it, right, is this fact that I really feel like I'm navigating through it, right? I can look at, maybe I'm looking at admissions across, where am I getting my students from, different states, different areas. Maybe I want to look at my financial information, and I'm looking at basically a P&L, but I've got the ability to drill into that P&L. The tool gives me all of that kind of information. I can even link back to my original server, right? So I actually can take you within the report down so far, and then maybe there's more details, like, you know, why are applicants from, you know, Iowa dropping off, right? I can go back to the server and begin to do my analysis as to why things like that are happening. With the latest release of Cognos 10.2.1, we've got some new technology that came with it. What we were finding is once we started to get more visual, and that's what the active reports gave us, people wanted more reporting types, and they wanted report types that were more linked to their industry. So as you look at that slide right there, you'll see that there are more flow chart type charting. There are specific, I don't know, it almost looks like string diagram type charting, right? When you finance had all their different types of charting. And so what we found is we weren't able to keep up with all the different chart types that people really wanted once we got things so visual. So what Cognos did, and it was actually kind of an interesting story, Cognos worked with the folks from SPSS who were working on a more visual tool for their output, and they had developed something called Rave. And Rave is just it's an engine where you input data, but then on the fly, right, it begins to move this data around. So I'll actually go through and demo an actual Rave report for you. Go back. I'll actually go through and demo a Rave report for you and actually show you a little bit how that works. So with that, I'll have you turn that over to me there, Kelsey. And I'll share my desktop, which is actually sharing my iPad. Does everybody see my iPad? All right. So I'm actually working on my iPad here. So if you look in my lower left-hand corner down here, you'll see that I have an IBM Cognos logo. And if you simply go to your App Store, right, and type in IBM Cognos, you've got the ability to download the IBM mobile app. So I'm going to simply just select that, and it brings me into the app. So across the bottom, you can see that I've actually got a number of different areas. So the tool has the ability to push out a report, right? So I can push out a report, and that would end in that first little square area. The reports that are already sitting on my application are actually in the second area. And the third area are actually samples that IBM provides me. So when you go and download this, if you want to play with this, you can actually, everything in my samples folder you have access to as well. But I'm going to start in My Active Report. So I'm going to simply select that, and it's going to open it up. And my first report here is a higher education report, so I'm going to simply select it. So now what it's doing is it's actually rendering this report, but the entire report, again, think of it as a PDF, but the entire report is sitting on my iPad. So this report is actually about students and my students' applications and how they break down, right? So I'm looking at my top states, right, as far as you know, who's applying and how it breaks down. I can actually take a look at my bottom states and see how that's looking, right? If I go to a map of this, I can simply select the map, and I can now actually navigate through it, right? So, you know, how am I doing in South Dakota? You know, how am I doing in Texas, right? I can very easily, all I'm doing is just tapping the area that I want to get more information from. All right, let's look at another one. I'm going to go to a more financial looking report, right? So this is a little bit more of a P&L looking report. But again, in this report, you'll actually see that I've got the ability to drill up and drill down, right? So I've got my operating revenue. I've got my allocated net tuition, right? I can just simply select that. It brings me down to the next level. If I want to roll it back up, I simply select it, and it rolls back up again. One of the really cool pieces to this technology is the fact that I've got the ability to start to communicate with others. So as I start to look at this, and my other operating revenue is sitting at 91%, maybe that's lower than I think, right? What I can do is actually, if you look in my upper right-hand corner, I actually have this pencil. So I can select this pencil. You'll see I get this email thing, but now I actually have a bit of a drawing board. So what I can do is I can actually select this, you know, and I can say, you know, what's going on here, right? I can put a note what's going on here, and I can actually email this off, right? So I can actually send this via email. I can send it, hang on, I can send it to Lisa.
On his iPad.
Right? And she'll know when we go to that meeting, right, she'll know exactly what we want to be talking about. Let's take a look at one more here really quick. Let's take a look at this Capital Seafoods real quick. So this one's a little bit out of your industry, but I want to just show you, it's got some functionality that I'd like to show you that was done for this sample report. As it comes up. All right, so as we look at this report, right, I can first go to the overview, right? So I simply select the button. One of the things I want you to pay attention to is look at how much more graphical these reports can be. You know, the fact that we've got backgrounds, we've got, you know, images and, you know, just textured backgrounds where you kind of see that paisley print behind the buttons at the top of my screen. What we've discovered is actually knowing Report Studio is just half of what you need to know about creating these reports. That, you know, typically it would take somebody with a little bit of graphic skills, right, to get these to the level that you want them. So actually here at eCapital, we actually have an innovation center now that has those type of people with visualization skills, people with graphic design skills, along with people who know the Report Studio tool very well. So as I look at this now, right, this particular, what I like about this particular report is a couple of things. The business has decided to budget, you either made it or you didn't, right? So things are either green or red. So every green bar in that bar chart, right, is their actuals to budget, right? So the gray is the budget, and the green or the red is the actual, right? So I can see very visually what months I made it and what months I didn't. The gray line that runs through it is last year. So I can tell a really great story here about exactly where I'm at. But now I can begin to break it down, right? I can break it down, in your case, you know, this might be by different departments. You know, how is each department doing, right? I can break it down by dollars. I can break it down by pounds, right? This might be in-state or out-of-state students, right? I can move into another area, right, and I can look at, this is breaking it down by different industries, right, by simply touching it, right, I can get more detail.
So it's similar to kind of what we had down yesterday with the lesson where I had stuff.
I can move into my customers, and this is something that everybody wants to know, and I really don't care what the industry is. Who are my top and who are my bottom, right? And so the tool will very easily do that kind of thing, right? I can do my top month to date, I can do my top year to date, right? And maybe I always want to know a little detail about it, right? I can simply select, I'll grab Harvest Market here. What are they buying from me? You know, what classes did they sign up for? Whatever the case might be, right? I can always take a look at that. All right, let me sneak out of this one and let me show you that new technology. So I'm going to sneak back. So I'm going to go all the way back to the interface that I started with, and I'm going to run over here to the IBM samples. So let me select this. Okay. And so this control metrics here is this new rave technology that I was talking about before. So let's talk about a little bit about how the other report that you were looking at works. What it did is when I created that report, think of it like a prompted report. But for every slice in that prompt, right, it's creating that report and creating a picture of that report. So think of it as a deck of cards. As I was selecting month to date or year to date, right, it would go get that picture of the data and it would animate the way it moved through those pictures so you had the interaction. This technology is going to work a little bit different. With the way this report will work in 10.2.1, sorry, it actually will go out and collect the data, but there's actually an engine now that sits within this report, and you'll actually see it working. So if I go take a look here at, I'm looking at my product line revenue for camping equipment, orange. If I just simply select personal accessories, right, you'll see how it kind of built as it went through that. It's doing the calculations for that on the fly. Right? You'll watch this chart come up. You see that? It's actually building those calculations as I go through it. It's probably a little bit more prevalent in this example, right, where I'm looking at all regions. I want to see the Americas, right? You can see it move apart. I want to see Americas and Asia Pacific. Did you see how they grow? That was actually it adding those together and showing me that information visually, right? I can add Central Europe to that, and it'll move it around. Right? Does that make sense? So that's really how that new technology works. So let's talk about how you get that new technology. So if you haven't been to this site, I encourage you to write this down. But there's a site out there called the Analytic Zone. And the Analytic Zone contains a lot of information on two different things. It contains a lot of information on Cognos Insight, and a lot of information on the metrics and this rave engine. So let's say I wanted to build, I've got 10.2.1 and I want to build one of these reports. How do I go about doing that? You'd go to the Analytic Zone, and there's about 29 different chart types. You're going to download this chart type, and it's going to tell you where to stick this chart in your IBM Cognos installation. And then you'll open up Report Studio, and the chart will be sitting in your toolbox. So it's not like a chart now where you have the whole palette of charts. Each one of these chart types will be an individual chart that you can drag and drop onto your screen. Creating them is very similar to the way you would create them in an active port. The way it functions is a little bit different. Okay? I want to show you another one of these things here. Right, so this one's kind of nice because it kind of does some scrolling. So on the right-hand side, you can see if I had a number of different things I wanted to pick between, I can scroll up and down, right? I can actually select golf equipment, right, and then it will change what I have on the left-hand side. So you can see with these RAID charts that they're very very interesting to work with, right? You can learn a lot of information as you go through this. So with that, I don't know, Kelsey, do you want to get some questions now? You want them to hold their questions till the end? How would you like to do that?
Yeah, I can unmute the phone line.
All right, we'll unmute the phone lines. Does anybody have any questions about Activereports or Cognos Mobile? You're awfully quiet for a Friday morning. All right, I'll have Kelsey post into the chat here the links to the Analytic Zone, because I think that's a valuable piece for you to have. And I do encourage, if you have any questions on Activereports or how we build them or how it works, that you let us know. And with that, I will turn this over to Lauren from Northwestern, who's going to talk to us a bit about TM1 best practices.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Lauren Ponke. I'm just starting my slideshow, so hopefully everybody can see my first slide here, and hopefully everybody can hear me. But I'm Lauren Ponke. I'm a Senior Business Systems Analyst here at Northwestern University, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the automations we've been able to enable for since we've began using TM1 a couple years ago, and just go through some things that really help solve some problems for us, and I hope will be useful to others who are using TM1, or at least informative if you're not actually using TM1 and just using reporting. Sorry about that. My navigation forward is not working. There we go. Anyway, briefly I'll talk a little bit about Northwestern University, quick overview just so you know what we're doing. And then the two automations that I want to talk about today are some email notifications that we've implemented, and also an automatic balancing automation, specifically because most of our focus so far has been on annual budgeting here. And so automatic balancing was something that was important to us, and I think we came up with a pretty good solution for that. So quick overview here of Northwestern University. I'm not going to read this entire slide to you, just give you a second to look at it. And there's just 2 points that I want to focus on. First, the second bullet point. So we do have 12 schools and colleges spread across 3 campuses. And our campuses are in Evanston, which is where I'm located, Chicago, and then we have 1 campus in Qatar. So we do have some decentralized practices. We have an enterprise financial system, things like that, but not every school does things the same way, which I assume is true for many, if not all of you. And then second, the last bullet point, just to note that our fiscal year is September to August, so that sort of sets up our dependencies and timelines for our annual budgeting process. So for TM1, we're on version 9.5.2. That's what we installed originally. We're still there, and we don't have an exact timeline, but in a couple of years I'm sure we'll be upgrading. And in June of this year, we installed FixPack 3, so we're current there. And we actually use both Contributor and Web for our budgeting applications. Talk a little bit more about that later, but we use Contributor for the workflow purposes. That was a really important thing for us that we would get out of TM1. But we use Web for some things that can't be in Contributor, some forms, reports, so we can do a little bit more formatting for people to look at it in a nicer format, export it to Excel in that format. And also there's some aspects of budgeting we actually don't want to be part of workflow, so we put that in Web on purpose to keep it separate so it's not dependent on the workflow in Contributor. So just talk through through a little bit of our timeline, where we're going next. So in September 2011, we did our TM1 installation, and then we started our first project with TM1, which was an annual budget application for our medical school only. So it was a pilot. I'm just doing it for them. However, they do a lot of distributed budgeting. So they had over 150 users and definitely some complex functionality. So it was a very good, broad pilot in terms of the sorts of things we were doing, and a successful pilot as well. And going back to our fiscal year, since it begins in September, our budgeting cycle starts in April, deadlines in July, so we can get the budgets for the next year uploaded at that time. So that was sort of the timing there. So the next year, or I guess finishing earlier this year, we implemented annual budgeting for the entire university, building on what we did for our medical school. So that rolled out in April, and our budgeting cycle concluded in July. And then going forward, obviously we'll maintain that. We'll continue doing annual budgeting within TM1, but we're also looking now, beginning a project to do a forecasting application. We don't have an exact date for the rollout, but it will likely be February or March of next year, so early calendar year 2014. And this will be a different system for us because this will be live all the time as opposed to our annual budget process. We do anticipate loading data every month because we have some schools that forecast for their performance for this fiscal year every month. Others forecast more on a quarterly basis, so our system will support all aspects of that. And again, that's a little different for us. So that's just a high-level overview of what we're doing. Next, I'm going to move in and actually talk first about the first automation today, email notifications. And I'll start by describing an area where what we were doing, why we thought we might need this. So one of the functionalities excuse me, that we have within our budgeting system is a commitment budgeting, basically modules. So these commitments are from a dean to their faculty or an area in their school of they're going to provide some sort of funding support. And our users had a need to budget those in a different way, although the rest of the commitments functionality is done in a separate system like we Excel on their part. So here's a quick overview of the four-step process our commitment budgeting goes through. So first, a user says, what's their planned usage for the commitment? So the dean might have said, I'll give you this money. The user says, I will use it this way, or I'd like to use more money, less money, et cetera. And then they say that, and then a reviewer in the dean's office approves the usage. Now, you could go back and forth. There might be some discussion about what's actually going to happen, but generally, let's say it's linear, it gets approved. And then the next step is the user is going to budget their usage on appropriate chart strings. So if they got a $5,000 commitment, they may want $1,000 to go to one chart string, $4,000 to another, or whatever they'd like. And they do that within our commitments module. And then once they've done that budgeting, then the final budget includes that commitment budget. So they work on it in one spot, and then it shows up in another, and it should work pretty seamlessly. So what we learned, feedback after our first year of budgeting with our medical school, is that we had a problem, or they said that they had a problem, that users would forget the third step, the actual budgeting of their commitments. Didn't cause as much of a problem as you might think, because the first year, the users would just go in and enter the budget manually rather than doing it in the commitments module. And so it took them a while to learn about this problem, but now they said, we have this problem, we need a solution. Now, the second year, we wouldn't let users enter this budget manually, so we said, well, in part, we have a solution. Users will have to do that, but the users were still concerned. So we looked at a couple alternatives. One was, well, we could say they'll be forced to remember when they can't enter their budget any other way. That didn't sound so great. The second was, the users proposed, well, could we change the process? Could we say users should indicate their usage, enter their budget, and then it gets approved all at once, so that since they're doing steps 1 and 3 together, they won't forget step 3. And we had some concerns about that because this business process was one that was needed, that the idea was usage has to be approved before it's budgeted on so that users don't spend time budgeting on something that's not going to be accepted. So that didn't seem like the greatest solution since it really overrode part of the process that was important. So instead we proposed an email solution to help with, if the stated problem was truly users were forgetting this and they needed a way to know to do this, maybe an email notification would help, and we could see if that worked, especially because adding that functionality was much easier than redoing all of our commitment cubes to support this new combined usage and budgeting functionality. So here's the steps we took to get this email notification in place. First, we created a user info cube, and we needed that because we didn't have this sort of information in our system. NetID is what we use at Northwestern to identify our employees, but what we didn't have within our TM1 model was things like people's names and their email address. So we were able to put together a really basic cube to hold this information, and we import the data from a table in our financial system that is also used for notifying people about their expense reports. So it covered, for the most part, almost every single user, and for the couple users where we couldn't import information, we could go in here manually and enter it, and then it would work fine. And so we reload this cube every night with the information from financials, and so we have a current list of our users and their contact information, which was the first step that we needed. Then the second step is so now we have all of our users. However, users are authorized for different areas, and in our model, an area, we call it a budget grouping. One budget grouping contains one or more department IDs. That's part of our approval hierarchy in Contributor. And so what we did is we created subsets by area. So this is an example from our training system. So we have an area called Train 001, and then we created a subset of every user who's authorized for that, just using our element security cube to figure out who those users were, and got those subsets going. And you might note there's the first element there is do not send email, which is clearly not a real user, a dummy element. And I'll explain a little more in a bit why we created that. But so we had all these consistent subsets with whoever's authorized. And then all we had to do was add a way for the users who are approving a commitment to select somebody to email. So we took our form, which already existed for approving commitments, which was pretty simple. They choose a budget grouping, their area, say they'd like to approve it, and they get approved. So it moves the usage from the proposed state to the approved state. And we added in this optional step 2 where they could select a user to notify via email. So when they do that, they see their budget grouping subsets of every user authorized for that area. And so this is the reason we added in that dummy element is when the user came into the form, if they chose to email no one gets emailed. It's optional. If they came in here and they decided test PCA 682 was who they wanted to notify, and they selected it, and then decided they didn't want to email anyone, at that point there was no way to really unselect easily, and they could log out, come back in, but that didn't seem practical. So instead, they could just reopen their list of authorized users and choose do not send email, and that will make sure that nobody gets an email. So it was just an easy way to make sure users can simply navigate to what they want to do and can undo their own entry if they don't like what they selected. So from here, users select the person they'd like to send an email to, and then they click the action button. It kicks off a TI process to send the email. And we just linked it into our existing process to approve commitments. So all we had to do was add 2 parameters. So who is the user they're emailing, and then who's the user who's doing the approving. And then we also added in some scripting in the epilogue to basically call a VB script file that sends the email. And to do that, we call that, we send it some parameters such as who we're sending it to, from, subject, the message body. We can also send attachments. In this case, we're not doing that. And it just executes the command and sends the email along with the approval. And the process handles all the optional features as well, so that if they don't want to send an email, it doesn't do that. And then here's an example of the email the user might receive. And so in this example, you can see that we always send it from the user doing the approving. So it's not we don't make it look like a system-generated email. So if the user needs to correspond with their approver, they can do that pretty easily. And what we did when we set this up is, we asked the users, does this meet your needs? And they agreed. They thought they liked that, and they liked that the message. And of course, we could modify the message to be whatever makes sense. But so basically, the feedback that we heard was that this seem to meet their needs. You know, we haven't heard further that they're asking for more changes because users are getting step 3, because this email is definitely a lot more proactive solution that it's coming automatically as soon as the user is able to go in and do this work. So what I want to talk through next is just a couple of the components that sort of allowed us to do this, or actually some of the other email uses and other components of that. So we have overnight TI processes, which I'm assuming many, not all of you do. So we're doing structure updates, importing data from our financial system, refreshing security, all sorts of things. And we wanted to automate how we knew if any errors occurred versus coming in the next morning and looking for error files, and sometimes learning that a bit late, later than you'd like to. So we basically tied into all of our overnight processing to send emails. So an example of one of those might look something like this, where we put the name of the process and we attach the file. This example is actually more of an audit file where we're making sure our department dimension has all the departments it should. But if it's a log file from the TI process itself, we'll attach that so that we can get that automatically, meaning if something critical has occurred, you can start looking into it a lot more quickly versus having to go to the server and get that file. So this has been really helpful to us, and then we also added in, or I added in when the first day I think we didn't have any errors, so we weren't missing any departments, weren't missing any accounts, everything was great. We didn't get an email. My first thought was, oh no, the process didn't run. So now we have a success email just to tell us that everything's finished, and if we don't get that, then we worry something's wrong with the server, which doesn't happen that often, but it's very helpful for us. So now this is really nice that we know what's going on more quickly. We also have another example of a user-driven email, and we call these user exports. So we have certain dimensions that has a hierarchy that the users, they want to know how that hierarchy is set up so that they can better understand where their data might go. But in TM1, we don't really have a good way to show our non-admin users a dimension structure that's meaningful to them, that can be shared with their department. So we created a process that will, for certain hierarchies, create a text file that gives them the information they need and send them that information. So here's an example of that email. We'll just attach it and send it to them, and now they can get it from the system, and it shows up in their email box very quickly and can do whatever they need to with that. And they feel a lot more informed, that they understand what's going on behind the scenes, but they don't need to look at dimension structures that just aren't going to be as meaningful to them. We can include whatever we need here. So this has also been helpful to just include more transparency about the system to the users who are going to use it. So these are things we have implemented right now. We've been thinking about some future uses, although we are being careful because, you know, once you get started with this, you've got this great tool, like a hammer. Everything looks like a nail. We're not trying to solve everything with email, but we have some ideas and we keep it in mind. And I think our users like this functionality, so they keep it in mind too. So a couple places we've been thinking are error notifications, more than our overnight processing, maybe from a user-run TI process. We have a number of those. Normally when we've looked in our log files, typical reasons people get errors are they submit a blank form, or they had an error message on the page, but they insisted on submitting it anyway. We don't really want to know about those, but if in the future we had some sort of a critical process that was more sensitive and we really needed to know if it failed and needed to be able to understand some of the context of what the user was doing, maybe we would email ourselves and tell ourselves about that more immediately, or we could use it for debugging for ourselves. Change notifications is another possibility. So if something new is needed in our system, so for example, that department that was missing, maybe we would notify our budget office directly rather than having it come to those of us who are maintaining TM1, or if structure changes, because we do allow users to add elements to some dimensions, maybe we'd notify someone that occurred. Similarly, we could look at confirming users when they do actions like that. So if they've added an element, we've seen sometimes users receive a success message, and all of our structure changes occur overnight, and so the user sees a success message, dismisses it, and then promptly forgets what they added, and the next day doesn't know what to go look for. And unfortunately, this happens more than we'd like. So maybe we could start sending confirmation emails to users to tell them what they added and when it will be available so that they can use their email inbox for that rather than having to call our help desk. And finally, maybe we would start communicating with external systems. So we have a process right now where users can indicate they don't want to budget on a chart string within our system, but it's not going to affect the financial system. It won't inactivate or close it there. That's a separate process. We thought about possibly having an action button on a form where the user can inactivate in our budgeting system and easily send an email with their request to the appropriate group here at the university, and just making that not 100% automated, but much more closely tied together than if they were to have to go to their Outlook and send an email request and remember to do that. So those are just some of the thoughts we've had, and we're definitely keeping it in mind going forward. Before I talk about the next topic, automatic balancing, I did want to see if anyone has any questions about this. I can also just take questions at the end. I'm not sure what's easiest with the format.
I've unmuted the phone line if anyone has any questions.
Then on top of it, she had an issue with Mary, and Alexa's not making those other team members. Oh my God, she's got to live in the middle. I didn't hear this whole experience. You know,
I think we can go on.
Yeah, I think so too. I hear some voices, but I don't think they're questions, so I'm going to go on.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about this automatic balancing we added in, but first just a quick overview of sort of the high-level annual budgeting component. So what are we doing when we're doing annual budgeting here at Northwestern, since I know everybody's process varies. So we're doing account-level budgeting. This means that people are entering their budget at a pretty detailed level. So our chart string is fund, department, project, and account, and we don't let them enter higher-level budgets. They can't just say, in this example, I want an expense budget. Instead, they have to indicate which account codes they want their expense budget on. So we start with that premise, and then second, we do have some chart string balancing requirements. So overall, a lot of our chart strings, the expectation is they will be balanced at the chart string level. So here we're looking at our faculty project chart string, and that if the user enters this budget, 1,050 for expense, that they would have a corresponding 1,050 revenue budget. Now, we do have some exceptions to this requirement, but overall, this is a common expectation of how people are going about their budgeting. And so basically, we wanted to look at, well, what could we do to automate that where appropriate? So these are sort of the three things we were looking at that we needed to help solve. First is that sometimes, instead of balancing the budget on a revenue account code within that chart string, that expense budget, such as the one I just showed, actually would be funded through planned spending from fund balances, from their reserves. So it wouldn't be accurate to put the budget on another account code when they expect it to come from reserves, and that's how it would be balanced. Another thing that can occur is that the spending authority can be coming from unrestricted funds. So maybe this chart string needs to be out of balance because the spending authority is coming from somewhere else. So balancing it, again, wouldn't make sense. And then finally, as I said earlier, not every school is the same. So some of our schools want every chart string balanced across the board, others don't. And so we needed a way to handle this, along with the first two items, that variability and how people are really balancing their budget, so it can just be a better representation of what's actually happening. So what we went ahead and did with our automatic balancing solution, I'll sort of demonstrate how it works, then I'll talk a little bit about the back end. So a user enters an unbalanced budget. This looks similar to the slide I showed previously. So they say, here's my expense budget, and then they click recalculate. And what we do behind the scenes is we automatically balance the budget. So there you go, might look something like this. So you can see the expense budget is now calculated. The budget is balanced, and it's balanced by using reserves. So that line there is a revenue line to indicate you're using reserves from revenue to cover that budget. And then overall, at the top, our faculty project chart string is balanced next to 0. I also want to point out that that revenue roll-up is also 0. So our use of reserves is not part of the rest of our revenue account roll-ups, and that's by design. That's what makes this whole solution work. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but so revenue looks like it's 0 because they haven't budgeted any revenue, but we do have a revenue budget of use of reserves, and then the net budget is 0. So that's a kind of automatic balancing at its most basic, but the user might want to enter a balanced budget. So they think, I don't want it to automatically balance, so they'll enter some data. So here they've entered 2 amounts. It'll balance out that expense budget they had entered previously. They haven't hit recalculate yet. And just to call your attention, on the next slide, note this revenue line is going to change, the revenue roll-up, and this line, the use of reserves, is going to disappear. So I'm not going to show it to you on the next slide because it's just not going to be there anymore. It's not needed. So use of reserves gets removed. You can't see it. And you can also note that the revenue is now calculated because we have actual revenue amounts entered, but our net budget is still 0 because in this case the user balanced their own budget. So that no change there, but we have no need for automatic balancing, and the system can handle that just fine. So another scenario that could happen is the allocation of spending authority, so allocating unrestricted funds. So that's another item we need to support. In this case, this is just a really basic view of an allocation cube that we have, where this 110 chart string is providing $2,000 of spending authority to the faculty project chart string we've been working with. So looking at that line there, we're saying it's going to have that spending authority, and then the 110 is having $2,000 removed. And what this results in when they enter this allocation amount is a buildup of reserves and an unbalanced budget, since that's the goal here, is they are not balancing this budget within its own chart string. It should remain unbalanced, and we provided a way to do that so that they're not almost artificially balancing a budget when they know that they're getting spending authority from another chart string. And again, you can see that that expense buildup of reserves line does not roll up to our expense subtotal. It's pulled out separately, but it does affect the overall budget that you're seeing at the top there. So now I'll talk a little more about the structure that enables this functionality, because what you've seen here, this is what the user sees when they enter data. This is just how it works, the magic that they see. So we have a couple pieces. First, we have what we call a prep file admin cube, and that's because to us in our system, a prep file is a high-level area, so it's above budget grouping. So for example, our medical school is one prep file. It's one large area. And our admin cube, it's just a way to profile these prep files for special considerations mostly in our rules and processes. So it looks something like this. So we could have a prep file opt in to automatic balancing, which in our case means every single chart string for all funds will automatically balance. If an area opts out, there are only certain funds that will automatically balance based on requirements from our budget office. So what this means for us, because this is really behind the scenes, is that we don't have to hard code anything in our rules. Our rules just come and look at this cube and then work the way they're supposed to. It also means that if one day an area wants to change their preferences, everything immediately works, recalculates, and the new preference goes into effect. So it's really easy to maintain and profile and handle the different needs of our very different schools. And so this has worked out really well for us. Second, our structure that helps with this is our chart string dimension structure, which I had mentioned a bit earlier. So here is one view of it where we have our revenue consolidation, but then our revenue use of reserves account is separate, does not roll up to that, then our expense consolidation, then our expense buildup of reserves. And this is really what enables all of our calculations to occur correctly, so that on the back end we can figure out what is the amount that's needed to balance a budget. What's also important about this solution is that since we're doing a lot of things behind the scene and a user clicks recalculate, lines suddenly appear, we wanted to be able to call attention to those lines. It was definitely important to not hide things so that they didn't see a row show up. They just blended in with others. So by pulling these out, it really shows up more to users, and they're more aware of what's going on, which, again, part of being transparent and letting them understand the system. So that's really been helpful as well, but it also supports what we're doing behind the scenes, which is the last piece that I'd like to show. So this is how our data is actually flowing when a user clicks recalculate, all of what they can't see. So first, a user can input data. We have our budget input cube on the left, and that's what I showed some screenshots of earlier. They enter an unbalanced budget. Up on the top right is that allocation input cube where they can enter spending authority allocation. I want to point out that this is also where we make use of the contributor and web components. Budget input is in contributor because it's very much a part of our workflow. Allocation input is in web for a couple reasons. One is that it is intended to be used by a user. One user could be entering an allocation while another user is budgeting, and this removes the dependency of having to take ownership. So instead of users fighting each other taking ownership to get little bits of data entered, allocation input isn't in contributor, so it takes it out of the picture there. And we have applied different security to it as well, where a lot of users who are entering data in contributor never see any of our allocation cubes, and we only put them in web. And we've also, in order to have the data show up in the right place and not have to have the ownership dependency affecting things, we've implemented a parallel hierarchy. So as I mentioned earlier, our approval hierarchy is budget groupings. We have the same hierarchy used in web and allocation input, just with a different name, so that all the data matches up. We know exactly where it needs to go. We just use a different dimension so that it takes away that dependency. And this solution has worked really well for us in several cubes, and this is just one example of it. So users can be entering data in one or both of these places, and when they click recalculate, we have a cube called carry forward map. And what that does is it calculates the net chart string budget. So it looks at that revenue roll-up, that expense roll-up, says what's the difference? Is it zero? Is it balanced? Or is there a net difference between the two? So figuring that information out. And then the next thing that happens, again, all behind the scenes, is we have a carry forward cube that takes that information combined with the spending authority allocation and calculates the budgeted use buildup of reserves. So it actually figures out, based on whether the chart string is balanced or not, whether there's an allocation that's supposed to keep it unbalanced, what is this amount that I need to put on those use buildup of reserves account lines, and then finally, from a user's perspective, they just see their budgeted use buildup of reserves in their budget input cube. So this solution is interesting because it's almost circular, and normally that's not the kind of thing we're doing in TM1, but it works very, very well here because it's seamless to a user and still, very relatively simple solution in terms of what we needed to do behind the scenes for rules. So it's so far been working very well for our needs. So that's the two main topics I wanted to discuss today. And so last thing is just if there are any questions on anything I've shown or with automatic balancing or any questions on email notifications, I can take those now.
All right, so we'll have Kelsey unmute everybody's phones.
Yep, everyone's unmuted.
They're unmuted. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Well, Lauren, thank you very much. That was very interesting. With that, we will turn this over to Nicole, who's from IBM, who's going to talk to us about predictive analytics for higher education.
Great, thank you. I'm actually going to kick it over to Will Crone, who will start us up, and Will, I'll get your slides up, and let me know when you can see them.
Cool. Thanks, Nicole. Well, folks, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Will Crone. I'm a subject matter expert and advisor in the area of predictive analytics. I come to you from IBM Spss. For those that are familiar with SPSS, we were acquired by IBM about 3 years ago, and most of you folks probably know us for our statistics product. Has probably been around for about 40, 50 years now, and taught in pretty much every university. And so wanted to take a moment today to just talk a little bit about predictive analytics, how it can be used, how it ties into Cognos, and just some of the insights that we're seeing from various universities and using it in different capacities, different applications. So if we go on to the next slide here. So this is a progression chart of how we see predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics fitting into the big picture. Obviously, we've been facing a huge wave of what we call big data here in the past 3 to 4 years. And how are we going to make use of that? How are we going to better understand the relationships, the causes and effects, the patterns that we see within that data? And for everyone on this call, today you're mostly using descriptive analytics or business intelligence by breaking it down to various types of visualization tools and charts and graphs and so forth, and getting a pretty good idea as far as where things are happening and why they're happening and how they've happened in the past. From there, we're going to move into what we call predictive and prescriptive analytics. So this is, if we're using a bad analogy here, but if we're in the car, we're now not looking in the rearview mirror, but we're looking out and over the windshield. And how we get into predictive analytics is by looking at the past, looking at the causes and effects, the things that have already happened, and taking those same instances and now applying that to today. Today, are we seeing some of those same symptoms that we've seen in the past? And by understanding what's happening today, can we get a better idea of what's going to happen tomorrow? So I'll give you a couple instances here. We see this quite a bit with student dropout and student retention. So are there reasons why students drop out, and what were those reasons? And are there people today that are facing the same type of situations, and can we intervene before something happens? And students drop out for a variety of reasons. It's not just bad grades or bad test scores, but perhaps they took on a double major when they shouldn't have, or perhaps they got a part-time job when they didn't have time, or maybe something that's happening at home, parents divorce, or there's a death in the family, or any number of reasons. Financial aid being one of the big ones. And so by understanding those situations, can we prescribe, can we intervene to influence what's going to happen down the line? And so that's predictive and prescriptive analytics in a nutshell. If we go to the next slide here, you get a better idea as far as how SPSS fits into the picture. As I mentioned before, most of you folks are probably familiar with IBM SPSS Statistics. That's our foundational tool, and does some deep analytical statistics functionality, and it's anything from single variable to multivariate analytics, and being able to test various hypotheses. The product that probably excites me the most is Ibm Spss Modeler. This is our data mining tool, and this is where we don't have a hypothesis. We don't know why students are dropping out, or we don't know why alums are giving or not giving to our institution, or we don't know why students choose our school over other schools, and there could be a multitude of reasons. What Modeler does through the data mining tool is that it lets the data speak for itself. So we'll ask it a key question: why do certain alums give money to our organization and others don't? And then the modeler will tell us the top reasons why these things happen, top three reasons, 5 reasons, 10 reasons, however there may be, and then creates a prediction based on our current situation, based on our current alumni base in this case. Can we identify alums that should be giving that aren't giving today? How much would they give? When should we contact them? How should we contact them? And so forth. So now you're making best use of your pool and of the alums that they can reach out to, and trying to maximize the amount of funding that's coming in. That's all done through predictive and prescriptive analytics. So that's with IBM SPSS Modeler. When we get into SPSS decision management, this is taking the results out of the hands of the researcher or the analyst, and now delivering it to the people that need the insights at that moment, because there are times where we need real-time predictions. And so this may be a teacher, it may be a counselor, it may be someone that's reaching out to various alums, where we need that real-time insight. They're not doing the analysis themselves, but they just simply need some type of portal, some type of display in order to show that this person is facing this type of situation, and here's our recommendation of what to do next. The last product I wanted to mention is IBM SPSS Data Collection. You'll see that there on the left, this is our survey and research tool that we have. Works great with the other products that we have. If you're doing survey survey feedback on what students are thinking, what faculty are thinking, what your alums are thinking, and so forth. This is a great tool that integrates with the rest of our suite in order to make better decisions and get a handle on some of the unstructured data, some of the sentiment data that can be used within SPSS Modeler. One last product that I promised Nicole that I mentioned is Analytic Catalyst, which is coming out, which actually just came out in the past month or two. It ties into our analytics server, and if you have a Hadoop cluster there within your institution, it acts almost like a modeler light, where you don't need to know how to build a predictive model, but you just simply put in some key factors and what is it that you're looking for, and it creates some very, very quick insights to what you're trying to achieve with some great visualizations. All these tools can be fed back into Cognos, and so that's really the nice thing, is that it works well together if you're currently in a Cognos environment where you can both read data from Cognos as well as put it back out into a Cognos environment, whether that's on a desktop or an iPad and so forth. So at this moment, I'm going to hand it back over to Nicole to go over a demonstration of SPSS Modeler. But if you have any questions at the end of this, we'd love to entertain any Q&A session that we have. So, Nicole, it's all yours.
Great, thanks. I'm going to switch over to Modeler, but I'm going to start with a blank canvas first. Just to give you a sense of some of the different ways that Modeler could be used in a higher education setting. I actually spent several years as an analyst in higher education and institutional research, so I was tapped to do many of these activities and using SPSS solutions to get these projects done. But when we're thinking about different questions that might happen across campus departments, if we're thinking about a student admissions process, I break it down almost in 7 phases. You've got inquiry, application, admission, enrollment, persistence or retention, graduation, and ultimately donating as an alumnus. We can take the data through those checkpoints and really predict what are those types of students who are going to succeed or not at each of those checkpoints. Outside of that progression, we can think of applications regarding predicting campus crime, financial aid fraud, predicting achievement outcomes, and also looking at course sequencing and which course sequencing might help students become more successful in different departments or across the campus as a whole. So all of this can be done right within the Modeler solution. And I'm just going to give you a brief tour of the different components of Modeler, but then give you an example of a retention project. In this case, we've got Modeler, and this is our blank canvas, and we have different nodes, we call them, as they're listed at the bottom. Now, within Modeler, I'm going to zoom, hopefully, just so you can see it a little bit better. There we go. We can take a variety of different source nodes, and there's my Cognos source node. I can take statistics, and let's imagine I also have an Excel file. I might have data residing in all these different locations, but need to pull them together for a project. Within Modeler, it makes it very easy, particularly most of you have some sort of student ID marker, where we can pull all of these students together and merge them by ID. Now, if there's a concern with students being in different databases and not being able to connect them, let's say from applications through advancement, maybe you've got someone like Nicole Alioto, who's an alumnus. Well, when she was a student, she was Nicole Catapano. She's also moved and had some changes in her cell phone, but has the same email address. Within the Modeler Premium solution, which I don't have for showing you today, but if you're interested, we can show that. Entity Analytics is embedded, so we can look at a variety of variables and really determine whether or not this Nicole Catapano and Nicole Alioto are indeed the same person, and that will help you with your projects long term. So as we merge these data together, we can do a variety of different techniques. We can do some graphing, and you can see it's a light list of graphing options, while Modeler can allow you to take a look at a distribution. I'll share an example of that. It's not designed to be a data visualization tool. It's really designed to integrate well with other solutions like Cognos, but it gives you an idea more for a preview phase. For modeling purposes, a modeler has a variety of different techniques that can be used. Automated modeling really helps for when we're not sure what our data really, how they're operating with one another, or which type of model would be most accurate. The automated nodes allow you to run multiple models and determine which are the best fitting for your data. Our classification techniques, those are the ones where we're looking to predict the likelihood of something happening, and you'll see your traditional regressions and decision trees and several others in here as well. And I won't go through each one, but just to give you an idea of where they're located. We have association rules. This is typically for market basket analysis, but in higher education we see this with sequencing of courses. So if registered for this one, then likely to register for that one. Think about it in terms of selecting movies. If you like that movie, you might be interested in that movie as well. Similar techniques can be applied in higher education. And segmentation techniques. Those techniques are often used for marketing purposes, and we see a lot of admissions and enrollment management offices looking at clustering student profiles or applicant profiles, and not only just using those clusters for sending out marketing messages, but using those clusters for tracking success later on. We can output to a variety of different tables and whatnot, but let's look at export. Export is where now I'm deciding, after I've done all this work, I need to send my results somewhere. And I could send them to a variety of locations. And this can be done simultaneously. In the example I'll show with scoring student applications, we'll take a look at that. But I can go ahead and send these out to a variety of different places right at the same time, back to my database, out to Cognos, to statistics, to a report for someone to consume. It's all available right within Modeler. You might be looking at this, and I've had questions from IT departments saying, well, are we generating more data? How much storage capacity do I need? What we're doing here in this example that is not populated, I'm asking Modeler to go to these locations where these files already reside. I'm not changing them or overwriting them at any time. I'm just pointing in that direction. I'll do my analyses, and it's not until I push it out somewhere through an export that it actually is saved. The only thing saved within Modeler is this kind of workflow, or we call it a stream. Any questions so far?
We'll open up the line here real quick and ask and see.
Okay. Let me jump into an example where we have, we're interested in retention. And in this case, we're looking at historical data from, yes?
Yeah, I'm sorry, here, I had a quick question. When you say Ibm Cognos BI export, is that in terms of, is that a BI package that I can use within Cognos, or?
That should send it right out to, let me open up so you can see where it can go. You can set your connections right to your Cognos sources, and it can save as different tables within your Cognos environment. So it's connected to the Cognos Enterprise solution. Okay. If you have Cognos Insight, for example, you can export it as an Excel file and bring it into Cognos Insight.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
But it's a data source that could be leveraged within a package.
Oh, okay, it's a data source. Okay, cool.
Thank you. So in this example, our aim is to generate, we want to generate a rule set that predicts likelihood of persisting. So in our dashboard or reporting solution, we want our end users to see those students who are likely to not stick around for year 2. In order to do that, first we have to use historical data to figure out what are those key variables that are impeding one's persistence. What we can do is take a look at, in this case, we're just looking at one data source. Our data audit node, which I find very helpful, it's almost a checks and balances for your data quality. You might be doing analyses on data that you do not have a hand in generating. But what it allows me to do is it allows me to take a look at all of the variables simultaneously to see if anything looks odd or stands out as a problem. One of the areas I found very useful was valid sources. I was doing a project where we had about 6,000 cases, and you can see here we have 4,000 or 5,000. We had 6,000 cases, and as I was scrolling down, just taking a quick look at these variables, what I found was one of my variables only had 12 valid cases. So right away we knew there was a problem, and actually led back to the data source not anything else. So they had to do some adjustments before the modeling activities can continue. So in this example, we have some demographic information, the departments, we have some of their ACT, GPA information. We have information if they met with an alumnus, so had some connection. There's an alumni mentoring program in this example, so did they participate in that? Are they active on the internal Facebook page that is set up at the campus? Have they hosted an overnight for prospective students? And also looking at the financial aid packages. So we're taking a look at a variety of these indicators to see which ones matter. In this case, I'm going to jump ahead to the decision tree. I did do some automated modeling here to figure out which tree works best, but for the sake of time, I'll just jump to the results, and if we want to go back and investigate any of these nodes, I'll be happy to dive in. What I found for my persistence is, let's zoom in a little bit. We've got our persistence where about 50-50. We did some balancing so we can predict likelihood to persist and not likely to persist relatively equally. We have the top indicator being alumni meeting. So in this case, if they did participate in an alumni mentoring program, in this case, yes, their likelihood of persisting was much higher than if they did not. You can see the difference between our 80 and our 37% persistence. And that also differs from our node 0, which is where we start. For those who participate in the alumni meeting, that was the key predictor, and there's nothing else that branches out after that. However, for those who did not participate in this alumni program, the next indicator was financial aid. What's interesting here is we have the split at no financial aid package to some financial aid package, even though there were categories, there were different components. What Modeler will do is determine where that split is. Imagine if we had attendance data, for example, and we actually had the number of days, or if we had financial aid and we actually had the dollar amount. What Modeler would do is find the split in that distribution where there was a significant difference in performance. So while we might have policies that say, you know, a $3,000 financial aid package is kind of that key amount of money for a certain student because it's likely that they'll persist, we can actually check on that and put that in the distribution and determine, is it 3,000 or are students more likely to persist if it's 4,000 or if it's 2,400, and then we can look at how that would affect policy. Continuing down, let's take a look at these students who did not have financial aid, and if they did not host an overnight, we can pretty much say that they're going to be out the door. Whereas these students who had some financial aid, even if it was minimal financial aid, and they did host an overnight, their chance of persistence is much higher. This is just a quick example, and taking a look at this, we can almost think of this as a variety of if-then statements. If they did not have an alumni meeting and they had financial aid and they hosted an overnight, then their likelihood of persistence is. Now, that's a lot to remember, so what we do within Modeler is we generate a rule set. And what this rule set does, it encapsulates all of our rules that we've just created in this decision tree. So I'll dive in here and you can see each of these rules is now encapsulated, and we can apply that to students who are in the pipeline to determine what's their likelihood of persistence. Now we're getting one step closer to being able to share this out with our end users, advisors, and faculty to determine who's at risk for not sticking around. So this rule set, I'm just going to scroll down and drag it so you can see how we go from the modeling stream to the scoring stream. This rule set that we just generated is now within our scoring stream where we're taking current students, we're flowing that student population or demographics and those variables through the rule set and determining who is at risk. So what we've done is we've selected out those not likely to persist. And let's get to our table. Quickly run our table. What we have is a list of students, and in this case 780 records, and 5 fields including those top fields of alumni meeting, overnight, and financial aid. And we've changed it to a flag variable of did they get financial aid or not. We have our student IDs, which department they came from, and then their indicators. Just giving us a quick look, and we might say, you know, this is really important information. We want to share this out by department. What does that look like? You know, maybe we only have a certain amount of money that we're able to allocate towards this outreach. Perhaps we only have a certain number of resources who can go out and work with the students. We can see that in Department GBC, about 25% of those students not likely to persist are within this department. So that might be our starting point. We might go up to the top 3 or top 4 departments because we know that the majority of those students haven't participated in some of those outreach efforts, and maybe that's where we start with our alumni mentoring or solicit those students for an overnight visit for a potential student. There's all sorts of options for decision making. Now I've taken a look at that. I've filtered out only those variables that I want to share, and I could decide where they're going to go, and I could send them back to the database. I can send them to an Excel spreadsheet, to Cognos, or any other export options that I'm interested in for others to consume. This is just 2 brief examples, but this is the same type of approach we take for any variety of predictive modeling techniques, whether it's who's likely to donate, who's likely to graduate, who's likely to commit financial aid fraud. We would take a similar approach, taking historical data, developing the predictive models, and applying those rules to the students in the pipeline and being able to determine who's likely to be at risk or determine those outcomes. We'll mention a little bit about automating. These processes can be automated so that the streams can be triggered when new data are entered. There's also the possibility through analytical decision management of making it real time. Imagine your advisors typing in student information, and immediately we see their likelihood of persisting or not. It really depends on the infrastructure and how the results need to be consumed and by whom. This is my brief overview, again, just giving an idea of how the predictions would be generated and then sent out to Cognos. I could share a very light Cognos Insight dashboard that has likelihood of persisting at Tulip Technical College. And in this case, Tulip Technical College's top predictors were reason for applying to college and actually female and male guardian education. In this case, we can see the results by high school because the admissions department wants to do some early outreach. So who's not likely to persist and where are they coming from? What does it look like? Once I've clicked on no, now I can see that students from these left high schools are intending to come to Tulip Technical College to complete a degree, yet they're not likely to persist. And we see students from these schools who are looking at career goals, but they're not likely to persist. Similarly, we can take a look at the students from the high schools on the left, and they've got male and female guardians who have some college exposure, whether they've graduated or not. They do have quite a bit of college experience. A little different than those students who are coming from the other schools. There's less college experience from their male and female guardians. So right away, taking a look at the predictive results within this dashboard, my admissions group can really look at messaging differently in Granite Heights and Landmore because I want to focus on completing a degree and how one can do that at Tulip Technical College, whereas in the other schools I might focus on some sort of family approach where I might share about adult education or returning adults to involve the female and male guardians, and I might also look at the career goals and career and technical programs that might be interesting for those students. Now I'll open it up if there are questions or comments.
Nicole, that was awesome. Very informative. Does anybody have any questions? There's a quiet bunch out there today.
It leaves them speechless. Oh, somebody might have a question. I'm reading someone's mind. How do I know that the model is any good? I missed this note I wanted to share. I can check my model accuracy to make sure that my model is decent before I deploy. In this case, my model is accurate in the, let's average around 75% accurate when we look at the predicted persistence versus actual persistence. And that's where discussions within your institution will say, at 75% accuracy, that's when we'll go ahead and deploy the results and score new students and deploy the results to Cognos. Or I might say, we need to do some refinement and try to get it to 80% or a different number before I deploy. So again, this is a step you would engage in before going ahead and scoring new students and sending the results out. I didn't want to skip that, sorry.
Anyone have any other questions? Any questions on any of the topics? We do have a question from one of the schools on the line. It says, how has the experience been with other schools in upgrading to 10.2.1? And I think they were particularly focused on DQM. Does anybody on the line have any experience with that? I know what I've seen just from an e-capital perspective is we've seen people, so the release date on that was something like beginning of June, and we've seen it in development. I don't know that we've seen a ton go into production at this point. Anybody have any comments on that? Okay. Well, Kelsey, I think that's it, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Nicole and Lauren and Will, thank you so much for your participation. Very, very informative day, and we look forward to doing this again. Thank you so much for joining.